Hello and welcome to another episode of Before the Bell with myself, Alan Foley, and my co-presenter Joey Knight, as we look ahead to another huge night of championship boxing for Quest Boxing League Season 4. And we're going to be looking back at the last event at the Epsom Downs Racecourse in Surrey because there was so many talking points, so many epic fights on the night. And I know that there is a lot to cover. So we're going to try and go through as much as possible. So much to talk about. So many great fights to look forward to. And a few that we need to look back on. So, Joey, it seems like we haven't done this for a while, but I know you've been busy with obviously going to Turkey, getting some work done, sunbeds, training, etc., and fitting in some podcasts along the way. So
here and there, yeah.
How have you been?
I've been good, mate. I've been good. How have you been? I've been watching the shows. They've been really, really good this year. So lots of big fights, lots of fighters sort of coming to the ascendancy now. Fighters that maybe we hadn't known before that we're now starting to really carve out a career for himself on Quest. So really interested for the new season.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it feels a bit like a transition because you've had a lot of big names that have sort of come in, won titles, said they're hanging up the gloves, and now you've got a new breed of fighter, like you say, coming in, which I'll touch on some of the sort of the other names that have come into the competition that have made an instant impact over the last probably sort of 2 or 3 shows. But before we head on and look to the second half of the season, with the first show September 14th, the Epsom Downs Racecourse in Surrey with an absolutely stacked lineup, and we're still, I think, 9 weeks out from the show, and there's some big announcements coming next week. I'm going to look back at the last event, Too Hot to Handle, June the 29th. The first ever Quest European title was on the line, and that was between Max Shumba, former British champion, and Selgjekaj, national champion at the time. And I've got to say, it didn't last long. While it lasted, it was phenomenal, with Max Shumba coming out the winner, stopping Selgjekaj and handing Selgjekaj his first ever defeat in his whole boxing career. But I've got to say, an amazing night with some incredible fights. And I mean, I know that you weren't at the show, you were busy, but you've seen Selgjekaj in the past. You've seen him sort of steamroller and dominate the division. And we've also seen Max Shumba in action when obviously he's had 2 fights with Cornet Scott, won the British title and then lost it. But he stepped up to the plate to face Selgjekaj in this fight. And, you know, what a performance from Max Shumba.
I really rate Max Shumba. I thought that when I had first seen him box against Cornet Scott, he was probably the fighter on the night on that show, and this is some plaudits to him because there was a lot of fighters that really staked a claim to potentially even be fighter of the night. But for me, Max Shumba was the guy that impressed me the most on that night. I didn't really know much about him going into that fight, and he showed slick skill, really good counter punching, very good awareness as to what shots to throw and when to throw them and when to do your work and be out of range. So I thought that he showed his current ability and his level at that time was definitely there or thereabouts when it comes to the sort of title level in that weight division. So obviously coming in against Selgjekaj, it was always going to be a bit of a pick-em fight because Selgjekaj himself is a fighter that's really impressed, some really good wins over Adam Smith and a whole load of other fighters on the league. And not only that, he's got what in football we call the 12th man. You've got 11 players on the field, but then the 12th man can be the atmosphere, the crowd, how much the fans get behind you. And when you've got Selgjekaj fighting, it's pretty nutty, to be honest, but in a good way. It's you could almost take the roof off the venue with the support that he brings along with him, can't you? So I always thought it'd be a very, very hard fight, but I think probably by a whisker, by a Rizzler paper, I was just about picking Max Shumba in that fight. So it wasn't a massive surprise to me that he won, but in the style that he won, I think we were all surprised, weren't we?
Absolutely. I mean, that really was the kind of, I'd say, the acid test, as they talk about for boxers, the gut test, the gut check, whatever you want to call it. Selgjekaj had to step up and fight, arguably, I suppose Cornet Scott is the number one in the division up until technically that fight, because he'd beaten Max Shumba in the rematch quite sort of convincingly, and he wasn't available for this fight. So the whole reason that Max Shumba got the fight for the European was that Cornet Scott wasn't available. He had other commitments, and he was going to face the winner. So if Max Shumba won, which he did, it was going to be the trilogy fight, the rubber match, one apiece with Cornet Scott. And if Selgjekaj won the fight, he would face Cornay Scott in a fight that was already sort of made until 2-3 shows ago. But Selgjekaj picked up a knee injury. The fight was off, and then in stepped Max Shumba. So it's kind of in a roundabout way, it's weird how sort of things work out. But yeah, I've got to say the level of performance that Max Shumba put in, the way he dismantled Eri Selgjekaj and stopped him and made, that's one thing I never thought I would see with Selgjekaj, was his chin to be tested like that and to be sort of, badly hurt. He was hurt in the first, then Shumba was down in the first as well. He came back and Selgjekaj had a really impressive second round where he won the second round. And I've got to say, I was sitting ringside at the start of that second round, and I said to one of my colleagues who was ringside watching, I said, I don't think that this is going to come out this second round. I think Selgjekaj is done. And he kind of came back. And whether it was maybe that Shumba had kind of, emptied the tank in that first round, maybe a little bit. I know it sounds stupid, but he put a lot of punches together in that first round, and maybe he took his foot off the gas a little bit. But, in the third round, it was just like lights out for Selgjekaj, and, a phenomenal main event for that show.
I think it's funny because you're speaking there about the way that it sort of came out of chance, and it came out of an area of, as you say, Cornay Scott not being available. So maybe because Max Shumba had been beat by Cornay Scott, maybe you were thinking it was a lesser fight and maybe less of a test for Selgjekaj. But actually, I think what you'll realise, especially in this weight division, because this is notoriously, it's one of the best weight divisions on Quest, right? And I think that actually, if you were to see a round robin with all these guys, you'd get different winners each fight. So I think that styles make fights in boxing, and ultimately, stylistically, you might get a Max Shumba win against the Selgjekaj, but then potentially Selgjekaj could win against Cornay Scott, who obviously beat Max Shumba last time out. You got such a good sort of round robin, as I say, of different fighters going into this mix. So again, doesn't massively surprise me that obviously Selgjekaj was beaten in this one, but it wouldn't massively surprise me if he was to get a rematch and win in this one. I think the skill level is right up there in this weight division.
100%. And I don't want to sort of touch on this because this is another announcement altogether, a huge announcement that's coming up. But you touched on the depth of talent in the Quest light heavyweight division, and that kind of round robin of, that fighter fights that fighter. He could win one time, but he could lose another time. Coming up, date to be confirmed, venue to be confirmed, but we are going to be bringing back the Quest Knockout Tournament, where you have 8 fighters, 7 fights, and 1 ultimate winner on one night of boxing. And it is going to be the first one, will be the light heavyweight. So this is the first time it's been announced. There are so many good light heavyweights, like you've just mentioned. You've got Cornay Scott, Max Shumba, Eri Selgjekaj, a few fighters who are out injured who could be returning for this sort of max chart. Possibly Lee Cannon, British super middleweight champion, may fancy a step up to the plate, as well as a host of other really, really good fighters who may even consider dropping down from light cruiserweight. So that's to be confirmed. There's going to be some big announcements and some huge news on that coming very soon. But as I say, a great card of boxing on June the 29th. And coming up next, I'm going to talk about some big fights that involves, obviously, names we've already just mentioned, Max Shumba, Eri Selgjekaj, but also we've got the mouth-watering rematch. And I say mouth-watering, this one, light the fuse, get ready for fireworks. It's already being talked about. It was one of those fights back at Epsom Downs Racecourse in Surrey, and the fight I'm talking about was Simeon Dennis, Luke Hills, the national cruiserweight title showdown between the champion Dennis up against the challenger Hills, and it was really fiery, really spicy in the build-up to it. On the night, if you didn't see what happened, basically, long and short of it is, it was just warming up, and then there was a little bit of afters after, I think it was the first or the second round, and it all kind of descended into a little bit of chaos, and the fight was called by referee Seamus Dunn and just basically said, that's it, I'm not going to let it continue. But this has been bubbling away. This is one of those, no hype required, no sort of storytelling. The narrative is just basically both of these guys want the fight. Both of them believe that they are going to win. And it's already brewing up to be probably, I say arguably, I say it every time, it sounds a little bit sort of cliche, but the biggest rematch in Quest history for a number of reasons.
Well, I think it is, because I think that ultimately, as much as you can look at times, and this definitely isn't my stance, but as much as some people could look down their nose at these sort of things and think, okay, it's a gentleman's sport and it doesn't need the extra drama, the extra sort of pantomime element to it. As a fan, we absolutely love that. And that's just us being honest, right? So, of course, we'd have rather the fight on the night wasn't stopped. I think they did one full round, and I think it was stopped during the second round because it kicked off. And, obviously both parties, both corner teams were finding it hard to be able to control themselves in that moment. And obviously the tensions really were at boiling point, let's say, right? But there was enough for us to see in that first round or so how the fight could potentially go. Simeon Dennis was boxing really well in the opening stages of that fight. However, I think that you would probably be naive to then base how a rematch goes off of that first round. And I would also say that, as someone that knows the Dennis and Dyer gym, they won't be reading in too much to that first round. They will very much understand that, okay, that's a fight that, we trained hard for, but it's in the past now. And now we need to approach this one with new tactics. And if you're Luke Hills, you're probably looking at that fight and going, okay, it doesn't really matter how that first round was going, because ultimately I was being outpointed in that first round. But I think Luke Hills would probably admit that the way he sees a win coming against Simeon Dennis before the first fight even happened would probably be to break him down over the rounds, to really enforce himself in the latter stages. And when you see the amount that Simeon Dennis was obviously having to move around the outskirts of the ring and box on the back foot, and obviously, that's his game. He's a very good, slick, back foot southpaw boxer. When you see the amount he was having to move, the smart money would say that as the rounds progressed, he would have been naturally getting tired having to do that, because Luke Hills had took the centre of the ring. Now, the other side of that is you could go, okay, Simeon Dennis might have tired as the rounds went on, but he might have also been landing enough punches on Luke Hills to be able to significantly dent his stamina in that fight and his cardio in that fight. And I'm realising as I'm talking now, there's so many different possibilities that is why this makes this fight so interesting, because ultimately, I don't think anyone can wholeheartedly say they know how this fight's going to go in the rematch.
No, I don't think so. And it's got, like you say, there's layers to this fight, and there's a slightly kind of maybe a different dynamic coming into the rematch, because it was a bit of an unknown quantity. So if you're Simeon Dennis, you would be thinking coming into this, that first round, I was just warming up. I was catching him. I was sort of, getting into my rhythm. I liked how that fight was going. If I was sort of Simeon Dennis, I could see that I can then step on the gas in the second and the third, maybe put my punches together, a little bit more spite. But for Luke Hills, he's now had a little flavour of what Simeon Dennis brings to the table. He's been in there with him. So now his approach, his thinking may be slightly different, where he was thinking, well, do you know what? He was actually a little bit better than I thought, or his movement was a little bit sort of crisper, or I now know what I need to work on for the rematch, and that's maybe a slightly different approach, or he may be thinking, do you know what? I was prepared to lose the first to kind of feel out what he was like, how he moved, what he was sort of open to, and then my game plan would come through, like you say, wear him down the stretch, tire him out a little bit, and then really put the pressure on, because Luke Hills has shown he's got a fantastic chin. I mean, I remember a fight at the Epsom Downs Racecourse in Surrey with a fighter called Chris Brill that Luke Hills had many, many years ago on the Queensbury Boxing League. And Luke Hills got caught in that first round, and his legs did a little bit of a dance. And I thought, wow, he's gone. And I was thinking, if Chris Brill jumps on him now, he could potentially stop Luke Hills. But credit where credit's due, Luke Hills weathered the storm and came back to win that fight and win it strongly. And I thought that gives you a little bit of an insight that if you can be rocked, and I mean rocked that badly, and your legs completely betray you, and you can come back strong, then that is one of those sort of boxes ticked where you go, do you know what? I've taken shots, and I've shown what I can come back from.
See, I actually remember that fight well. I actually fought on that same card. I'm pretty sure it was the Never Back Down card, and that was the night I fought Seb Hallett, right? And I remember that fight well. And this is the thing, right? Not only has Luke Hill shown he's got a good chin at times, right? He's also shown that pretty much every man he gets in a boxing ring with, when he does land on that opponent's going to be in real troublesome moments, right? So then if you're Luke Hills, and obviously fighters will draw confidence in different ways that they can, but if you're Luke Hills, you're probably going to be looking at that and thinking, okay, I got off to a bad start. Potentially, it really went in my favour, the fact that the fight was, abandoned early doors, because it's very hard to make those adjustments in-game. It's very hard after the second or the third round to go, right, you need to stylistically change what you're doing here. I've been in fights when I've needed to make adjustments, and I know how hard it is, and I know that sometimes, whether it's a fight, whether it's a spar, ultimately, you're best off going home, living to fight another day, and then coming back and making that adjustment, because to do it in the moment can be very, very hard. So that's going to benefit Luke Hills. But the main thing that if I'm Luke Hills, I'm going to be looking at here is I'm going to be thinking, every man that I've landed significant damage on, every man that I've really landed these hands on has not had the answers to it. And in that first round, he didn't land anything clean and flush on Simeon Dennis, in my opinion. Now, he might have landed some cuffing shots here and there. Maybe he might have landed a good jab here and there. But ultimately, in terms of Luke Hills unloading punches, we still don't have the answer to how Simeon Dennis fares to those shots. So, again, this isn't my suggestion that Simeon Dennis is going to have any trouble there. But what I'm saying is, inside the mind of Luke Hills, this is what he's going to be looking at. So he's going to be thinking, right, okay, I need to make adjustments to not be picked off on the back foot as I was in that first round at times. But at the same time, everyone's got this picture in their head of how this fight might go because of what happened in the first round. But the elephant in the room is that I never actually landed any of my power punches on him in that first round. And Luke Hills will be confident that he can do that going forward. To flip it, Simeon Dennis is going to be thinking, as you said earlier, I was just warming up, mate. I was having a bit of fun in there. I was just warming up and I was going to go through the gears big time. And when you look at the quality that Simeon Dennis has in the gym, his brother Mark's almost a legend of your shows, right? You got Liam Dyer in there, one of the best heavyweights that I think I've ever seen on your shows as well. So you got Anthony Yard that goes down there to spar, and I'm sure Simeon Dennis does rounds of him. So the quality that he's going to be training at, he would probably be listening to me speaking as I did there about Luke Hills and thinking, mate, you've not got a clue. I take punches off Anthony Yard in the gym. I'm fine taking him off Luke Hills. So that is why there's so many question marks around this fight. And ultimately, as a promoter yourself, the fights that have the most question marks around are the most intriguing. We really want to see and get the answers to all these questions.
Oh, absolutely. And how many times have we seen in boxing where, fights that, you start off with and you don't really sort of get up for it, you're not hyped about it. And I'm not saying this is one of those fights, but the fighters talk their way and talk the fight into something massive. But I think this fight is already massive. And I think as the build-up goes, the date for this is going to be October the 19th. The venue will be confirmed next week. But I think as we get closer to this fight, like you said, you'll be able to argue it for different ways. You'll be able to look at the last fight, what little there was of that. You'll be able to listen to the fighters. And like you say, Simeon Dennis, he's got the likes of Anthony Yard sparring at the gym, other good pros, his brother, Liam Dyer. The whole mindset of that gym is, what we do in training, nobody else is doing. And what we face in sparring, in training, what we go through, the fight is never going to be as hard as that. So, that's where they draw their confidence from. And also Dennis's performances against his previous two opponents, Matt Hilliker, phenomenal performance. And I think that, as we look ahead to this fight, it's going to keep building and it's going to keep bubbling away. And there are going to be interviews and there's going to be talk and debate. But I just think, I've told both the fighters, what happened last time can't happen again. And they're like, no, this is going to be a fight that will go down in Quest history as, arguably one of the biggest rematches. Like, as I say, the Cornet Scott, Max Shumba trilogy fight, there's going to be talk, there's going to be hype. I know that Cornet Scott was really unhappy that Max Shumba fought for the European title ahead of him. But like I say, he wasn't available. So, when a fighter isn't available as a promoter, you've got to make alternative sort of plans. And in steps, obviously, Max Shumba to face Selgjekaj and obviously we've spoken about that. We knew what happened. So these fights alone are two massive, massive fights that the fans can really, really get up for, that both fighters are known in both fights. There's history, there's a narrative of that you could talk about all day long, and they're two unbelievable fights. But before those fights, you've got the September card, and I'm going to try and not delve too deep into this, but there's a lot of fighters on this card you know really well, a lot of big fights that are going to be confirmed. So just to sort of off the top of my head, you've got Yawajari. He's going to be defending his novice heavyweight title, and I know obviously that you know Yao really well. Yeah, trained alongside him at Joe Miles, sort of kickboxing. You've got Michael Tavares. He is the light welterweight novice champion. He's back in action after winning his comeback fight last time out on June the 29th. You've got a great fight, no title on the line, but you've got Brian Turner versus Jack Dowling in the light cruiserweight division, which promises to be an absolute fantastic barnstormer of a fight. And you've also got Tawas Abdullah. Now, I don't know, you weren't at the last show, but Tawas Abdullah, they call him the Afghani assassin, but very good sort of schooled ex-amateur fighter. He won the regional middleweight title, and he's going to be facing Harry Camden in his first defense on September the 14th, which Camden was actually on the undercard on June the 29th. And to go long story short, Harry Camden fought AJ Ahmed, and that fight was an eliminator to fight George Toohey, who was the regional light middleweight champion. But the fight ended in a draw. Great fight. A lot of people sort of tipped Camden to get the nod on that night, but didn't happen. But basically a bit of a stalemate, so it was a draw. So Harry Camden is going to fight Tawas Abdullah, and AJ Ahmed is going to fight George Toohey in their rubber match trilogy. It's one apiece. A great fight. Last time out, Toohey won, beat Ahmed to obviously win the title, but a little bit of spice to this. And I've spoken to George Toohey, and he was saying, listen, I'm 37 now. I don't really have too many fights left in me, and I want to do or get as much as I can, the biggest fights, the biggest titles. So we're going to elevate that fight. So the national light middleweight title is vacant. It's a 5-round fight. So George Toohey is going to come in. So he's obviously he's won the novice and the regional now. George Toohey is going to challenge AJ Ahmed for the vacant national title over 5 rounds. It's the trilogy. It's the rubber match. And George Toohey, I spoke to him on the phone and I said to him, this fight, for your fans, it may be a little bit more of a kind of a harder sell, because even though it's one apiece, it was they might want to see you fight somebody different. But with the national title on the line, I know AJ Ahmed and his team are really confident that, they come back and they beat George Toohey this time. But George Toohey, I've never heard a fighter be so confident and say, what I'm doing in the gym now, how I am sparring, how I am training, everything, this isn't even going to be close, this fight. I'm that confident that this will be so conclusive that it will put the argument to bed. After this fight, there won't be any sort of arguments to say, oh, you could see that fight again. It's going to be that convincing that, when I beat AJ Ahmed this time, there's going to be no doubts in anybody's mind, whether that's his mind, AJ Ahmed's mind, my mind, fans, whoever. You will see the best George Toohey that's ever been. And also, like I say, you've got the Harry Camden fight. Now, funnily enough, Harry Camden was originally supposed to fight Tawas Abdullah a couple of seasons ago in a non-title fight, but he had to pull out on fight week. And I know that after Tawas Abdullah won the title on June the 29th, he saw Camden and he said, you and me, we were supposed to fight before. Let's do it. Let's get it on. So, you've got those 2 fights already, which are fantastic fights, as well as Michael Tavares, Yawajari. And there's another fighter. Now, I don't know if you've seen him, and we talked earlier about this new breed of fighter coming in, sort of this new sort of, or next generation, if you want to call it. But there is a fighter called Ollie Wilkins. Now, Ollie made his debut on Quest, and he beat Jan Costa for the regional lightweight title, which is 61.23 kg. looked fantastic in doing so. Really, really impressive performance to stop Jan Costa. And then he fought again on June the 29th up against Nicky Slatcher. And Wilkins dropped down to super featherweight. And what a fantastic fight. I mean, Nicky Slatcher is a great, great operator. He's had a great run. But Wilkins, for me, it's still early in the season, but I'm going to say Ollie Wilkins could be standout fighter of the season so far, because just his performances, his shot selection, the way he goes to the body, the way he sort of controls the fight, fantastic fighter. And he's going to be defending his title, and there could be some big announcements for potential opponents on that as well. So many great fights to look forward to, so many big nights ahead for the second half of the season. I can't wait. There's so many great fights.
Yeah, I'm just literally thinking of opponents there that I could throw in the mix for that one. I know there's one man that really, if he wants to prove himself as the number one at lightweight, potentially, if he's going to campaign there, I'd like to see him take on Seb Hallett, to be honest. I think that when you name there Slatcher, that's a sort of mutual opponent between two of them. Obviously, Seb Hallett won that fight in sort of emphatic fashion as well. So maybe that might be a sort of measuring stick to gauge where those two are at in comparison to each other, I should say. But yeah, so much action that I'm looking forward to coming up on these shows, man.
Yeah, and they're getting better and better in terms of, there's so many different fighters coming. There's fighters who are coming back. I mean, one mention that I've got to give on the last show, and the result was like, I called it a draw on the night, and it's not me sitting on the fence, but Gareth Gardner, former Queensbury Boxing League legend, 3-division British champion, he came back and he fought Stuart Goodwin in a fight that I've got to say, I knew the fight was going to be good. I knew this fight potentially could steal the show. And from the first round, I said, they don't need a ring for this fight. They need a telephone box. It was literally up close. Both of them just exchanged body shot after body shot. And I mean, Gareth Gardner is, he's done the amateurs, he's done Queensbury, he turned professional, he's come back. That was his second fight in Quest. And even though he's 40, his engine, his work rate is unbelievable. But Stuart Goodwin, I take my hat off to Stuart Goodwin, because I said to people in this in the build-up to that show and that fight, I said, if you were putting this on back in the Queensbury days when Gareth was at the top of the tree and Stuart was sort of like regional champion, people would have probably looked at you and gone, that's a total mismatch. Gardner, no way, you can't put that on. But Stuart Goodwin found himself in the best possible place he'd been in his career, his training, and he put on an unbelievable performance. And, you could see that fight all day long, every 2 or 3 times, and it would be a fantastic fight.
So that didn't surprise me, actually, in terms of Stuart Goodwin really turning up in that fight, because I used to share a gym with Stuart Goodwin. I used to share a lot of rounds with Stu as well, right? And I've always thought that he was a massively underrated fighter on the formerly the Queensbury League and on Quest, because Stu took losses to opponents that realistically, if you had been in the gym with him day in, day out like I had, that he should have never lost to those people, right? Yeah. So I think that he's definitely underperformed in certain occasions and on certain nights, especially on your shows. But actually, the fighter that I used to see in the gym, Stu was a real handful in the gym, He really good sparring, used to mix it with the best of them, Ricky James, Ben Davis, used to mix it with all these boys, and there was never a gulf in the level between him and the rest of the other boys in the gym. And I think for Stu, it was always a case of getting his head right on the night and being able to actually turn up and perform under the lights. And I think that you definitely saw that in the Gareth Gardner fight. Now, I think I would very much agree with you in terms of saying that once upon a time that might have been looked at as a mismatch. But actually, maybe with Gareth Gardner ever so slightly just on the way down from where he was in his heyday, which, by the way, pound for pound, best fight we've ever seen on your shows, to be honest. I can literally only remember the one fight when he lost. That was against Taylor and Jones, who went on to be a Southern Area champion in the pro rank. So very, very high benchmark for Gareth Gardner there. Yeah. I'd love to see a rematch in that one. My biggest regret from this show gone by, and I'm always normally at shows, but that was the one fight that I was gutted that I missed, because for me, someone that's come through watching your shows from 10, 12 years ago when it was formerly the Queensbury League, they were two stalemates, two established fighters on the old shows and on the new ones, and that's why I really wanted to see them two go to war. So hopefully we can get that one on again, maybe for some sort of title, and we can see that rematch happen.
Listen, it's like I say with everyone, when people say about the fights on Quest, and we talk about what's the motivation, and for me, I always say, the great thing about Quest is it's about putting on the best fights against the best fighters. And when I look at these fights, like some people say, oh, well, he's coming in off a loss. I say, yeah, that fighter, not talking about any fight in particular, but, that fighter's coming in off a loss. But it doesn't matter because it's still a great fight, like with UFC, for example, boxing's very much, and we've talked about this before, about this golden O, about this zero, and that, fighters have got padded records and they look, look great on paper, but, they've had a lot of easy fights. Whereas with Quest, I'll put fights on that I think, for the fans, gives them the best value for money. And I think that is what it should be about. It shouldn't be about, protecting unbeaten records and that fighter, because there's lots of fighters with huge undefeated records who would get, smashed to pieces by guys who have got a 50-50 record. It's about levels. So, I'm thinking off the top of my head as well. There's another fantastic fight on the card for September 14th, and that is another kind of young, up-and-coming fighter who's already kind of established himself. I mean, he's the novice super middleweight champion, Tom Kellogg. He won the title in his last fight, but has been out with a bit of a hand injury. But he's coming back, and there's a couple of possible opponents that I'm just trying to sort of tie down for him. But a very exciting boxer out the same stable, Noel Green Boxing Gym, with the likes of AJ Ahmed. And also, they're all coming back to me now. There's so many fights, it's hard to remember. But you've got the young Polish Express, Leonard Morka, who's had 2 fights, 2 stoppages on Quest. He looks fantastic in both performances, and he's fought a couple of good kids, but he kind of just made them look ordinary. And then, as I say, we've got the October and the November show, November the 23rd, the season finale this year. So there are so many big fights to look forward to. So many fights probably that I've forgotten, but like I say, the nights at Epsom are legendary. The atmosphere is unbelievable. The fighters love the venue because it's just like, no other venue in terms of the facilities and the whole sort of way the arena feels, that, only holds 1,000 people. But that atmosphere, those walkouts, the sort of, I was looking back at the kind of B-roll footage of the slow-mo footage, that the promo that went up on Quest socials. So, it was some really atmospheric, some great sort of cutaways from the show. And it just kind of gives you a chance to sit back and go, wow, that was amazing, because you don't appreciate it on the night sometimes because there's so much going on. But, as I say, you've been there, both in the ring, both as a commentator, pundit, you've seen it yourself. So you've seen it from all the different sides, from a fighter's perspective. You've been in the corner of fighters as well. So, there are some fantastic fights to be made, and hopefully we can make them, like you mentioned, touched on Seb Hallett, Ollie Wilkins. That'd be a fantastic fight. That really would be, because Hallett, great win against Sean Pitchford down in Chichester. And there is another show, it's just being confirmed, but there will be one October, November time down in Chichester as well, which is going to be added to the roster. So, there's some fantastic nights of boxing coming up. We're going to keep sort of putting them on. And as I say, we touched on it, Quest Knockout Tournament, keep your eyes sort of open, because there'll be some big announcements on that. And as I say, just really looking forward to the second half of the season.
Yeah, I can't wait. And especially for the knockout tournament as well. Like, I remember some of my best memories of being at your shows, and definitely the knockout tournaments that we've seen gone by. I mentioned the one there that Gareth Gardner got to the final of. Taylin Jones obviously won that. He went on to do really good things in the pro ranks. Ben Davis, no one can forget that one. I think it was Kieran Harris that he beat in the final. Absolutely. Ben Davis definitely took the hard route to the final. He had to beat Jordan Tucker on his way there. I think there was one other guy that he had to beat on his way there. So those shows really are, if you're not already, which I'm sure you are, that's where you're getting your money's worth on the night.
100%. Like you say, you've mentioned a few names there, but listen, we could talk about boxing, we could talk about fights, we could talk about shows all day long. Literally, the time has flown by, but Unfortunately, that is all we have got time for. But as I say, some huge nights coming up for Quest Boxing League on the second half of the season. September 14th is where it all kicks off again at the Epsom Downs Racecourse in Surrey. The show, Nothing Personal, that's the name of the event. There's going to be a stacked card, some amazing title fights, some great undercard action, and as I say, some big announcements regarding all the other huge fights coming up on the rest of the season. So keep in touch with us on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Facebook. There's some great clips, some great footage, some big announcements that always happen on there. And as I say, I'm Alan Foley. This is Joey Knight. This is Before the Bell. And this is Quest Boxing League.